Do you want to know what heart rate variability is and what it's used for? Well, we brought to the channel one of the leading people in the world, Dr. Marco Altini. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notification, click the like button. Now, enjoy the interview. Tenemos hoy al doctor Marco Altini, ¿vale? Esta entrevista lo primero que tenemos que decir es que va a ser en inglés, por lo tanto voy a pasar ya al inglés para presentarlo por respeto a Marco que ha aceptado esta entrevista. Well, we have today Dr. Marco Altini. Marco is one of the people that know more about heart rate variability. Some of you could be possible that you don't know what is heart rate variability, but some of you could be possible that you know a little bit. Okay, and who is Marco? Marco is, today I will present Marco like this. So today there is the news about the data science and sports science that have to be linked or the last 3-5 years. But Marco begins with this a lot of years ago. It probably the one of the first person that integrate this tech data programming in the same place, and he's a author about heart rate variability that he will explain a little bit what it in this 30-minute interview. Marco have do 2 masters regarding sports science and informatic engineers. He's the creator of probably of the most used app of heart rate variability for all the sport that teach heart rate variability for training. Okay, and he's a advisor of Aura. The Aura is the ring that you can assess your sleep to monitor your sleep with heart rate variability and some things that and more things that they developed at the company. He's a lecturer in Amsterdam University and is one of the persons that contributes more about how to apply the heart rate variability in sports science, not just for endurance training, but team sports and also with healthy style life. Okay, Marco, you're welcome. Thank you to be here. It's a pleasure for me, for the podcast, for the people that will listen to you, that you accepted to do this interview.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, we heard about heart rate variability. Some of us studied a little bit, but could you explain in a simple terms what is the heart rate variability, different from the typical heart rate?
Yeah, for sure. So when we measure heart rate, let's say over a certain period of time, or a few seconds or a minute, we look at how many beats we have in that period of time. For example, if our heart rate is 60 beats per minute, we have 60 beats in this minute. But then the time between consecutive beats is not always exactly 1 second in this case, but there is some variability. It could be more time or less time. And this is something that is not random, it's not there by chance, but this variability, which we call heart rate variability when we quantify it, is associated to how the body responds to stressors. That's why we are interested in it normally. So as we face a stressor, any stressor physical like exercise or psychological like any other form of stress, we have a response in the body, which typically goes through different systems. For example, the autonomic nervous system, which is the one that is taking care of a lot of different functions in the body without our conscious control, for example, breathing and also to other things, the heart beating as well. And then the autonomic nervous system, it impacts many things in our body, including heart rhythm. So if we face a stressor, we cannot really quantify stress. We cannot measure the autonomic nervous system either, but we can measure heart rate variability, which is impacted by the autonomic nervous system and the stress response. So it becomes an indirect way to capture the body's stress response non-invasively and easily just by measuring this variation between consecutive beats. And that's why eventually we use it, because it's just an indirect way to capture how the body responds to stress.
So as I understand, it's just know the info that you have about your body, and the people that are involved in sports science, in just endurance, in all the sports science, understand the body can be stressed, but with a lot of things. It's not just but the training load is the unique stressor, is it?
Exactly. So that's important to say, because heart rate variability is used a lot in sports science because it's an application where it's easy to manipulate, for example, the main stressor, which could be training. So you could change training based on stress responses, or you could increase training, reduce training. But we always need to remember that what we measure is not just the effect of training, it's the effect of everything that is happening. So our lifestyle will determine also if we have changes in heart rate variability. For example, if yesterday we drank something, some alcohol or things like that, or if we are getting sick, or if we are traveling, maybe all sorts of different forms of stress on the body will be captured by this metric. And that's why I think it becomes interesting, because we can only take so much stress, right? Our capacity to handle stress is limited. And then there is an overall marker of stress, which can help us understand how we are coping with all the different stressors, training included.
Okay, thank you, Marco. And then how can we measure this variability? Any chest band, or which tools can we use to assess, and when can we assess the variability?
So in terms of measurement, this is where we had probably the biggest changes in the past, maybe 5-10 years. The science, let's say, it's more or less the same that has been for 50-60 years. The technology has changed a lot. So now you could use an app just with a phone camera, like HRV for training that we made, but then you can also pair the app with a chest strap. Typically a polar strap is a good one. Or you have also, well, let's say that these methods would be for a morning measurement, right? So the morning routine, and take the measurement as soon as you wake up. That could be a way to capture your HRV in a way that allows you over time to understand how you respond to different stressors. An alternative to this way of measuring in the morning, either with a phone camera or with a chest strap, would be to use some of the wearables that are on the market today. For example, you were mentioning, or with that I collaborate with, but also there are others now. Some Garmin watches can do it. The book band can do it. So there are a couple of sensors that can measure HRV as we sleep, as an alternative to measuring first thing in the morning. And that's also a valid way to capture the body's response to stress. So I would say these are maybe the two main methods. Some wearable sensors for a morning measurement with a few other sensors, or the phone. And these are the main technologies, I would say, for measurement. If you do measure in the morning, even just 1 minute is sufficient typically to capture this snapshot. So you don't need a long measurement for the metrics that we use these days to capture variability, and that makes it also quite easy, I think.
Okay, and it doesn't matter, or it matters which tools you use. For example, if you are in a holidays and you forgot your chest strap, and then I forgot my chest strap, I will do now with the camera of the phone. It will be the same measurement, or did it have to be the same measurement, or it's better to don't cross different tools?
Yeah, it's a great question, actually, because the optical technology, the cameras or the or the wearables, these sensors that are using, lights to capture changes in blood flow instead of measuring the electrical activity of the heart, are very similar, but it's not exactly the same. So ideally, it's better to be consistent and use always the same method. So if you use for the camera, then use always that. If you use the chest strap, use always that. It could be that they are very similar or even same, but there can also be a bit of difference because it's not really exactly the same thing that we are measuring. So when you look at relative changes over time on a day-to-day basis, then you capture the changes with stress in a similar way, and both methods are fine. But then interchanging them could also create some differences, especially if you change also between morning and night. That's also quite different. The night, of course, comes earlier, the morning comes later. So it's just a bit of a different state as well. So it's better in those cases to always stick to the same routine and the same method over time. And then if you prefer to change, then go with a new one and give it some days maybe to readjust.
Okay, so for the people that are listening, they will intervene. A short recipe is use the same device always. If not, it's better that do not work, and always at the same moment of the day.
Exactly. Yep. Exactly. And especially if we do it in the morning, first thing in the morning, that's ideal. If you need to go to the bathroom, go and then come back, and then you sit and take your measurement. That's typically the best before you have breakfast or exercise or take coffee and other things.
Okay, and the big question is why the heart rate variability is important indicator for health and physical performance in this case of sports. If you want to talk a little bit about health and then of the sport performance, but why it's important?
Yeah, basically because we don't have many ways to capture how we respond to the things that we do. So we can track all the things that we do, the behavior, the training. We know all the details about the training and, the power you're pushing and maybe even your body response in that moment, heart rate and the internal load and, the external load and everything. But then you want to see how that session or other stressors are actually impacting your body. And here is where heart rate variability becomes useful because when you measure the morning after, you will see, for example, if you have responded positively to that stimulus. And that typically means that your heart rate variability has not changed much. So normally, if your data is quite stable and it remains stable even after you've done maybe a hard workout, that is a good sign because you bounce back to normal. Because if you were to measure right after the workout or during, your HRV will be very low because there is high stress on the body. But then you renormalize quick. And actually, the fitter you are, the faster you renormalize. So your HRV goes back to normal. And when you measure the morning after, then you would also capture this change. So that allows you also to understand when things are not going so well. For example, if you do not respond well, maybe your HRV remains suppressed. That gives you an indication that maybe the session was a bit too much for your fitness right now, and maybe you need to make some adjustments. Or maybe there are other stressors, right? Maybe we are, it's a different season, it's getting hot, and then we need to deal also with the environment and, the heat during training, and that might require that it takes more time to recover or that our session is scaled down a bit in intensity. So looking at the response allows us to understand how things are going, how we're coping, and how we can make some changes in the context of training. That becomes a useful feedback tool. In the context of health more in general, this is, again, just a marker of stress. And as such, it can allow us also to see how all these stressors have an impact on our body, regardless of training, even if we don't care about training. Still, if we are getting sick or we are getting stressed by something at work, those kind of things will also have an impact on our body. And by trying to maintain a situation in balance, let's say, of a, again, stable positive response, we might be able to deal better with the various stresses that we are facing.
Okay. And you talk about the stressors, and we have to explain a little bit that the stressor that you are talking about is any input that entered to the person. It's not just a stress or anxiety that could be more what the first thing that the people that are listening is. It's just anything that could affect to your body. Okay, it doesn't matter if
Exactly.
it's from training, for eating, for sleeping, for you have a bad day. All of these are stressors. Okay, and now we are this question about and now we are talking about stress, like I just before. So, like I should deal with bad feelings. How factors like stress or bad nutrition can affect to heart rate variability?
So normally what we would see in those cases is, for example, a reduction. So uh, the it's basically the opposite of what we normally see for resting heart rate. Now, people maybe are more familiar also with resting heart rate. It's simpler to measure. It's something that maybe we've seen more times. And we know that when we get a bit stressed, our heart rate, resting heart rate, tends to increase a bit. I think many of us have experienced situations in which you are stressed or a bit nervous or anxious, and you know that your heart rate feels a bit higher. In those cases, HRV is suppressed, so it's reduced. That is typically what happens in these situations, and then this can happen acutely. So basically, if you face a stressor and then you have a suppression, and then maybe things are normalized very quickly the following day, or it could even be that we have more chronic changes. So if the stressors continue day after day, and we are not able to get out of this situation of negative stress response, we could go in a chronic negative stress response, and then this could lead to overtraining in the context of training, or burnout in the context of other psychological stressors. So that's why these markers can also be early indicators of things that might happen down the line, and allow us maybe to try to make some changes so that we avoid these negative chronic responses over time.
Okay. One of the good things that your ad have is that you just have one or two numbers about heart rate variability. One that I think that you developed, that the 1 to 10 scale, and the other is the mean standard deviation, square standard deviation. Okay, but the people that said that wants to know a little bit more about heart rate, they will look for Google what is heart rate variability, and they will find a lot of variables. Why do you choose just one variable directly extracted from heart rate variability when it has a lot of variables?
Yeah, so heart rate variability can be computed in so many different ways, as you said, maybe even 50, 60 different ways. And many of these ways are a bit redundant, so eventually they look at the same things. Others, in the past, we thought that they were particularly useful to capture different aspects of the stress response. And then over time, we learned that it wasn't really true. So we could really just look specifically at one aspect, which is the parasympathetic system. So the one that is typically in charge of rest and relaxation. So when the parasympathetic system is more active, typically heart rate is lower and heart rate variability is a bit higher. And these are changes that happen quite quickly. So this RMSSD, this number that we use to quantify HRV in the app, but also I would say in most of the scientific literature these days, published papers and things like that, it's a marker that captures well mathematically these high frequency changes that are associated with parasympathetic activity. So physiologically, it's a more meaningful parameter. And also it's a parameter that it's also easier to compute and compare with other tools and published literature, because it is it is done the same way by everyone. So I think that's also a plus, because it makes it easier even if you want to look at your number with respect to what has been published in certain studies, then you can easily do it with this, while that was not the case with some of the other parameters that were used in the past.
Okay. And the heart variability, how you present the data, always, in the majority of the cases, it's a mid to long term adaptations. What is the difference to make decisions in a mid to long term or in a daily basis. It could be useful for a daily basis decision to modify training for tomorrow or to modify training for today if I have to do it.
Yeah, so I think this is where things have changed a bit in the past years in terms of how the various groups looking at studying how to use it to modify training have used it. So in the past, it was more reactive, so it was more the daily number and how that was with respect to your normal. For example, if today you had a bit of a suppression, lower HRV, then you would make an adjustment. For example, we reduce training intensity for today. Now, in the more recent studies, we look at how the baseline or 7 days moving average, so a more stable version of the signal, right? So what basically your weekly average, we can call it. So how this week is going basically with respect to your normal. And then if that is suppressed and going down, then we might make a change. So we are a bit less reactive because for your weekly average to go down, you need a couple of bad days. You don't need just one bad day typically. So in that case, you wait for a stronger stressor basically before you implement a change in training. So this is how the studies have been doing it now. I think that in general, it's a good idea to be less reactive, but at the same time, in real life, let's say, it's a bit more complicated than a study. So sometimes you might also need to make a change when you have just a daily score that is not good, right? For example, if you feel very bad and maybe you know that you're getting sick and you know your HRV is also low, then of course it doesn't make sense to wait 3-4 days and try to train hard while you're not well, just because you have to wait for your weekly data to be suppressed. So in real life, I think we need a combination of the two. We are not too reactive maybe if we feel good, but then if we feel a bit off, then we listen more and make the change maybe a bit earlier.
Okay. The next question, I know that it could be longer, but in a short term, it's always in the rate variability goes up, it's good, and if the rate variability goes down, it's bad, or there are some indications that not always it's like this.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not so simple as we thought maybe in the past, right? We always thought, okay, maybe higher is better for this metric, but eventually I think we've seen many situations in which that is not the case. So HRV, maybe we should see it the way we also use many other signals. If we think about blood pressure or blood glucose, we know that there is some optimal range, and too high or too low is not great. And for HRV, the same. So we know that when it's too low, there is high stress. But then in many situations, even when it's too high, it's also a situation that is not positive. This can happen sometimes after maybe very hard efforts, maybe people that have done a race or some competition, and then the day after, instead of the expected suppression and low value, they actually have the value that is quite high. And that does not mean that, they are super recovered, but it means that the body is really working hard to recover. So it's still highly parasympathetic, so to speak. But then this high value is not a positive sign. It just means that something has not renormalized yet. So I think that's why also we try to focus on the idea of stability and maintaining things within what is your normal range. And that is typically a better situation with respect to values that are outside of your norm.
Okay. I know that this here in Spain we say abrir otro melón, but they understand what this.
Maybe I do. Go ahead.
You will understand. What about to monitor the heart rate variability during the training?
Yeah. So during training, let's say that historically there have been some attempts to look at, for example, the relationship between certain the typical rate variability parameters and maybe exercise intensity thresholds captured through lactate or ventilation. And these were not particularly effective because basically the parameters that we used had a very small range during exercise because HRV was so suppressed, because the signal that we normally use to quantify HRV, these metrics that we also use to quantify HRV at rest, and a very small range during exercise. In the past few years, there have been more attempts to look at other rate variability features or numbers, as we call them, that seem more promising in this context. For example, they allow for a larger range of numbers as you exercise, and they seem to have also maybe a stronger relationship with different exercise intensities. There is one called DFA Alpha 1, which is just a mathematical way to capture other basically properties of heart rate variability during exercise. And that has shown to be more useful in the context of looking at exercise intensities, even though I think this is maybe still quite explorative work. So it's a bit maybe earlier to be able to use it in a way that is prescriptive for training. But it seems, something that could be useful if we are able to individualize it for an athlete in a way that you can, again, without other parameters that are harder to collect, lactate or ventilation and so on, still capture effectively exercise intensities.
So it could be an idea. You know more about this, but for example, it could be in the future when the tech advance to be an indicator to stop the set that you are training because you are looking for some physiological adaptation. The neuromuscular, when you go to maximum, when the leg says up, it's up. But when you are looking for more, it could be possible. This aerobic adaptation, or this limit to aerobic and aerobic adaptation, it could be in the future a good indicator to stop sets, not just work by time, but when the heart rate variability is modified and in which degree.
Yeah, it could be, or in ways basically to help us manage the intensity maybe a bit differently between these boundaries, right, of intensity. So it could be a way, yeah.
Okay. For the listeners that never use this heart rate variability to monitor the recovery process, which have to be the fifth steps that have to make. So an athlete comes to you and say, I want to begin to monitor my heart rate variability. I don't have anything. What you will propose?
All right. So I think the method to measure depends a bit on them. So I would ask first if they think they can make it a morning routine to take their measurement. Then the easiest would be get the app, and then you wake up, take your measurement with the phone. You don't need anything. But in some cases, it could be that the morning routine is not possible. Maybe they have some small children, or it's their routine in the morning is just too hectic, and you cannot just get those few minutes to relax and things like that. And in that case, maybe it's a better option to just have a wearable or something that you wear in the night, and then you try to get the data that way. So both are fine. Speak for individual preference what you think is best, and then stick to that method and start collecting data. I would say do not bother too much about the data for the first days or even weeks. Just take your measurements so that you start to learn, what is your normal, and you start slowly to see how you respond to different things you do in a way that maybe can help you making some meaningful changes.
Okay. And the heart rate variability, it's an objective measure, but it necessarily have to be related with the subjective measure that you feel, or it could be discrepance, but the heart rate variability says, hey, you are okay, but you're feeling very bad.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I don't think the objective measure needs to be used instead of the subjective one. I think they need to work together in a way. So sometimes looking at the objective data for a while can help us also become a bit more aware of the subjective, because sometimes we don't even stop and think how we are feeling. And then just by the act of measuring, maybe answering some questions in a questionnaire and things like that, we can also get in better tune with ourselves. And I think the two can be different. Sometimes maybe the HRV spot something in advance. Some other times there could be a suppression that maybe is not important. Maybe it was just, I don't know, a slow digestion, a bad dinner, or something that it doesn't really matter for the following day and when you're training and things like that. So we need to incorporate everything in there. So our subjective field and the objective data, and then try to use these two informations in a useful way. I think that's what's best. It's not about using the objective or the subjective, but it's trying to incorporate the two in a way that we have a better picture of what is happening.
Okay. Another question is about the age of the athlete. It just say that athlete of 15, 20 years that an athlete that is 40 or 35 years or 50 years days in Rome, it have the same importance in whole the picture of the training node process or monitoring.
Yeah. So I think in general, the way it is used is useful across all ages, because we never take absolute values and decide things based on that. So there will be differences because HRV changes with age in a way that typically it reduces with age. So it's lower in older people. But the way these tools are used is really never in terms of absolute numbers. It's always just relative changes with respect to your history. So you will capture the stress response over time in a similar way, regardless of what's your value. So if your value is lower or higher, still you just capture relative changes when you have a suppression because of higher stress and things like that. So I think at that point it is the same utility for many different people, because there are no predefined frame of references, but we just build one based on your own data when you start measuring.
And it could be similar from professional athletes and amateur athletes or more sedentary people. They need to explain.
Yeah. The way it is used for sure, but the way it behaves then will be different. For example, professional athletes most likely their data is a lot more stable. So you don't have all these suppressions every time you have a little stressor or a training that is a bit harder, because they can take a lot. So you would see that things stay normal a lot more. While for a recreational athlete, maybe that they also have sometimes overdo things a bit because they also plan their training not as well as a professional. Then you could see more swings in the data, and that could also inform you that maybe you need to make some adjustments and try to keep your data basically a bit more stable, like it would happen more naturally for a professional.
Okay, last question. If you have to convince someone to use rate variability, and the important thing, you asked about this question in all the interview, but in a short way, how do you convince the people, hey, use rate variability, it will be better for your life?
I don't know if I'm good at convincing, but I think this is just an objective way to capture stress, and we all face many different stressors for a number of reasons. So it can help us maybe keeping things a bit more in balance in our busy lives.
Okay, I have a particular, I don't know anything it's called, anecdote. It's good in English.
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
Particular anecdote that when I'm in holidays with my family, always my heart rate variability increased 20-25%. It's not, I don't know why, always. It doesn't matter. I live in a, I sleep in a camping. The bed is better than the have it, but always my heart rate variability increased 20-25%. Always.
Yeah. So it's a good thing we are going today, right? So it's gonna be better soon.
Okay, Marco, thank you so much for being here in the podcast. It has been a pleasure to have you here. I hope that you are invited to come again to talk about more specific in athlete and in cycling build its availability and how to be useful. And probably in 1 year in advance, it could be possible that we are using the health availability during training, and you can explain something about this.
For sure. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Marco. Bye. We hope you enjoyed this interview with Dr. Marco Altini, a very easy to understand explanation about the heart rate variability concept. I will leave you all the social media website and obviously the heart rate variability app in the notes of the program. If you like it, share with your friends, subscribe, turn on notifications, and if you have any question, leave it in the comments. I will read and answer it to you. Okay? See you.